Hey, you there. Before the show starts, I just want to say thank you for clicking on my humble show. And are you a musician? Or do you just have a cool story to tell? We're always looking for interview subjects and guests for the podcast. Check out our description for our email address and social media links and contact us if you're interested. Thank you, and on to the show. Welcome to the Nausea River podcast. I'm Theo Morgan, and I spent too long walking around in my flip-flops yesterday. Anyways, I spent the month of August feasting on high-quality new releases and choking down the worst ones too, like the side dish you eat only out of politeness. This episode covers a selection of full-length releases from August 23rd onwards. I had to draw the line somewhere for August, so apologies to everyone who wanted my opinion on the new Dark Tranquillity or Oxygen Destroyer. Save it for the year-end lists, perhaps, because they were both really good. No matter what I thought, I'd like to extend my thanks to every band mentioned in this episode for releasing music. Bandcamp or official store links are in the description, and I encourage everyone to buy what appeals to them. I'd also like to thank several resources that I use for keeping track of new releases: Encyclopedia Metalum, the Shreddit Release Radar on the r/metal subreddit, and Ghost Cult Magazine on YouTube. You all are better at this than I am. Niall, the underworld awaits us all! One of my favorite things about death metal is how a lot of the big-name genre veterans stay so consistent. Imagine if the big four of thrash did the same. What a better world we'd live in. Niall is no exception to this. Do I need to introduce them? If you like death metal even a little bit, you already know about the genre's resident Egyptologists and complete nerds. Niall's brand of death metal, flirting with bits of tech death and Egyptian-sounding melodies, is always welcome in my ears, and The Underworld Awaits Us All is, as a whole, a solid album. The opener and the infamously titled second track, Chapter for Not Being Hung Upside Down on a Stake in the Underworld and Made to Eat Feces by the Four Apes, promise a lot. It mostly delivers, but I found the album to lag a lot in the middle, and the added choir vocals don't always do it for me. That being said, I'm seeing them live in January, and I'm excited to hear these songs in a new setting. They are scheduled to play live on January 18th, 2025 at the Palladium in Worcester, co-headlining with 6 Feet Under. Melt Banana 3+5. Japan's Melt Banana have always been good at making their signature experimental, wild, punky, high-pitched noise rock feel fun. Their new album, 3+5, is 25 minutes of the most moshable music outside of metal and hardcore. The crowd inside my head goes nuts. One half noise and one half drinking Arizonas and playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I know it's not really metal, but I did discover them through a Metalhead's recommendations. 3+5 is a brief listen in the end. It's an easier sell that way. I don't consider their music a form of suffering at all, but I realize it's a potentially unpopular opinion. The screechy vocals of Yasuko Onuki were easy for me to get over when I first discovered them, so take my word for it. Waste 25 minutes or embrace the chaos like I did. Zeal and Ardor, Grief! Grief hooked me in on first listen. So far, every Zeal and Ardor release has. But it also compelled me to revisit 2016's Devil is Fine, the debut from the Swiss avant-garde act. One, it made me proud of following Zeal and Ardor since the very beginning, though Devil is Fine received so much good press that I can't brag about a time before they were cool. 2, while its blend of black metal, blues, and African-American spirituals is one of a kind, it stuck pretty closely to the concept. Tremolo picking, gospel vocals, and 3 electronic interludes that clashed with the other tracks. It is still one of my favorite albums. Zeal and Ardor escaped a fate that I worried about from the beginning, an undeniably cool project fizzling out due to real life or other commitments or lack of interest. After all, I tell everyone about the atmospheric Death Doom Legends disembowelment, whenever they ask about my disembowelment shirt at least. With 2018's Stranger Fruit and a spot opening for Death Heaven and Baroness a year later, Zeal and Ardor were, in fact, unstoppable. They still are, and I'm forever proud of them. It's just an odd feeling I get when I love Grief, every moment of it really, but realize they've strayed far from where they started. It sounds negative when I say something like, Sugarcoat is basically a Queens of the Stone Age song. I love Queens of the Stone Age, and Sugarcoat has been on repeat since this album dropped, alongside Thrill and Fend You Off and Killanova. Even Clawing Out, a song that baffled me as a single with its abrasive industrial beat, made so much more sense on the album. To me, it's realizing they've changed, but that it's more than okay. And it's a pretty natural change, all things considered, as Zeal and Ardor have been letting the blues rock, prog rock, and electronic/industrial influences seep in the whole time. Once a solo project of frontman Marcel Gagnon, Grief is the first album recorded with his live band in the studio, and they're all talented. There's a bit more polish this time, and don't they deserve it after all their hard work? A sonically diverse album, Grief is never, ever boring. At the same time, it feels more personal, at least when it closes out with To My Ilk. There is a more palpable level of despair and resolve to rise above oppression and hard times throughout the album, even though it's always been an element in their music and theming. At worst, I miss Satan's presence, as the subject doesn't come up in the lyrics much at all, even if the idea of satanic spirituals that started this project was ultimately a gimmick, something I'm rather confident Gagnon doesn't believe in himself. It's alright to be more real instead. Zeal and Ardor are scheduled to play live at Brighton Music Hall on November 25th, 2024, and this time as a headliner. The last word makes it very exciting for me. Spectral Wound, Songs of Blood and Mire. I am late to the Spectral Wound train, and I'm sorry for it. The Montreal-based black metal outfit got good press among my friends, or at least people I trusted the tastes of. I ended up listening to it on a warm summer morning in Boston, which was my second mistake. That being said, Songs of Blood and Mire is very good. Even as a black metal fan, I recognize the genre's biggest pitfalls, even bigger than the scene's harboring of Nazis and murderers. The music can be one note, tremolo-picked and fast but monotonous at the same time, and that's a tough sell for it, even if I like that. Spectral Wound are not monotonous, and they're not boring. They don't bring diverse influences into their black metal, but the album is a beautiful explosion of ice-cold anger and darkness. Flesh God Apocalypse Opera. I've never disliked Flesh God Apocalypse, but they were such a shoo-in for my tastes that I had very high expectations for them since the Mafia EP. I was in high school, and you could convince me to listen to anything marketed as death metal, symphonic metal, or even just metal with operatic male vocals. And here we have a band with all three. There was stuff I loved about the band, and it was almost all the talent of bassist and clean vocalist Paolo Rossi. The riffs and guitar work were good, but not great. The orchestration's fine, but not as soaring as I hoped. Eventually, I neglected them for a while. If I wanted my symphonic death metal fix, Septic Flesh did it much better. Fast forward to today, and the idea of an album without the member I liked the most was a hard sell. An album pinned on several concepts, but also being a farewell to Rossi. My expectations for symphonic metal are special. I have an attachment to the genre due to it being my gateway into metal, fun fact for everyone, so I go easy on it. When the riffs are lacking, I say that the focus should really be on the orchestration, and when both aren't up to standards, there's less to enjoy. Opera started weak. The riffs were basic chugging, the orchestration kind of bland, and while current clean singer Veronica Borticini is no slouch, she is also my least favorite vocalist for Flesh God Apocalypse. That being said, Opera finds its stride in the middle and end. Blood Clock has a lot of tempo changes, better riffs, and a beautiful choir. Matricide 821 is where it truly feels like an opera with a narrative and roles, and my favorite performance from Veronica. At that point, it's an incredible experience I couldn't get from any other artist. Fans of symphonic metal, especially those who like it with some teeth, will greatly appreciate this, and probably already do. Flesh God Apocalypse have a spot at the New England Hardcore and Metal Festival on September 22nd, 2024. I probably won't be there, and they stick out like a sore thumb in the lineup, but make room for them if you're already at the festival. It might be a good palate cleanser. Uniform American Standard. If I have to make up a complaint about American Standard, it's that its 21-minute eponymous opener would have been a better ending note for the faded brick wall of sludgy industrial rage. Despite the length, American Standard, the song, is no slog. It's a release of fury against a militaristic beat that makes Uniform's back catalog seem timid in comparison. Uniform are a loud, abrasive band, but on most days I would stop short of calling them metal. Noise and industrial don't have to be metal to stand as great genres. But for my listeners, American Standard is an album for metalheads. The black metal-esque riffing and permanent embrace almost made me wonder which band I was listening to. Uniform will be playing live on December 5th, 2024 at Arts at the Armory in Somerville. Simone Simon's Vermilion. The idea of a Simone Simons solo record would have meant everything to me 15 years ago. 15 years ago, it was 2009. I was the awkward sophomore transfer into my high school, and Dutch symphonic metal giants Epica released Design Your Universe, to date their only perfect album, and I wish it was all uphill from there. I can nitpick Epica song by song outside of that release. At all other points of their career, they always were let down by something. Earlier releases betrayed guitarist and composer Mark Janssen's biggest flaws: lazy riffing, plodding songwriting, and his pitiful death growls. Stuff that annoyed me about his previous project After Forever until he left, and they rapidly improved, a true glow-up after leaving a mediocre ex. The appeal of his new band was going to hinge on the orchestration, the choir, and the voice of Simone Simons. Haunting, operatic, and above all, high quality. Simone got her flowers. She's considered one of the best women in symphonic metal, getting mentioned in the same breath as her idol, Nightwish's Tarja Turunen. I actually do think it's an apt comparison, just not always a flattering one. My promise is to save all of the Nightwish hot takes for a dedicated episode. But the only one I'll betray is that Tarja easily fell victim to bad direction. I think she has some truly awful performances, both with Nightwish and in her solo work, despite being an incredible singer overall. A once-in-a-generation voice that dares to falter. That plagues Simone to this day, too. On one Epica song, she can thread the needle, her distinctive mezzo-soprano voice soaring above the violins when she uses her whole chest. Powerful, emotional, genre-defying kinds of performances. Skip one track and she's all pitchy and awkward, sometimes even bordering on sounding like shower singing. I heard Monopoly on Truth and swore off the band for years. I probably even blamed Simone for it at the time, but now I know it's unfair. Fast forward to now, and a solo project, or rather collaboration with Arjen Anthony Lucassen, was formed. I am not as familiar with Lucassen's work. He's famous forever now due to his long-running rock opera project Arion, but it always intimidated me due to its scale. I had heard some of it, but I felt like I was missing a lot of the context. He certainly is not the same creative mind that Mark Janssen is. Janssen, despite heading ambitious projects like After Forever and Epica, has a very restrained style of songwriting, one that often doesn't mesh with me. Lucassen is not afraid to be eccentric and creative and loud, and so finally enter Vermilion, an album like that. Progressive symphonic metal that lets itself be loose, have some electronic beats and belted vocals, and ultimately lets Simone Simons have the best vocal performance of her career. Even at her best with Epica, I wouldn't describe Simone's voice as having tons of bite to it. Powerful at times, but meant to be the sweet melodic linchpin of the band. She is not so restrained on Vermilion, and it harkened back to After Forever's shift after they lost Mark Janssen. Singer Floor Janssen, no relation, dropped a lot of the pretense of having to have a frigid, beautiful operatic voice. She's even more known now for her range, from the same operatic voice that got her notice to her throaty rock star flair. I didn't think Simone Simons was capable of it. In the early days of Epica, she was essentially a doe-eyed teenager plopped into the booth straight out of choir practice. And I don't know if her bandmates know how to write for her full range. That image stuck with me. But she is a force on Vermilion. Not a single moment does she come off as insecure, out of tune, or even out of breath. And that's more than I can say for a lot of her peers. King Crow, Hopium. I have to admit, I hadn't heard of King Crow until news of the release of their newest full-length, Hopium. It's a word I can only associate with what I can only describe as Twitter brain rot, so seeing it as a serious album title caught my attention. The Italian progressive metal outfit feels like a copy of Leprous or Haken at first, but they have been around for longer than either, having been formed in 1996. Hopium is a well-produced album with some ear-catching passages, though a lot of the songs fall flat instead of achieving the level of bombast I want from prog. It's a genre that gets accused of excess and pretension and annoying singers, but while I don't seek out prog that often anymore, it's what I expect when I find myself there too. King Crow is very capable of it after all. The 3-song stretch of Losing Game, White Rabbit's Hole, and Night Drive is indeed bombastic, dynamic, and most of all interesting. I also enjoyed the title track quite a bit. The whole album might not have been for me, but it could catch my attention late in its run, and I definitely recommend it for someone with a bigger appetite for prog. In the end, I hate that I did the Leprous comparison. They certainly aren't taking a break either. Leprous, Melodies of Atonement. In the darkest hours of 2020, I went to the last in-person music recommendation I received before we were all locked inside. It was March 1st. I was in the queue to see Devin Townsend live with Haken opening, and someone brought up Leprous. I like Leprous. Even without the brief pandemic obsession, the falsetto voice of Einar Solberg soothes some primal need of mine. I even liked their pivot away from metal with 2017's Melina, though I took the claims of them going back to their harder roots with Melodies of Atonement with a grain of salt. Whatever edge it brings back, and it does on some tracks, is negated by the fact I could play this for my dad. The album is good, but not amazing. It shines the most when I hear the ever-present influence of Solberg's brother-in-law, Ishan. Long story short, I love it when Norway's black metal legends pivot to doing other genres, and I'm a big fan of Ishan's eclectic solo catalog. Lots of tightly written progressive metal that betrays some of his black metal roots. He's not credited on this album, but if he slipped Limbo or Faceless onto an Ishan album with a hasty featuring Einar Solberg credit, I'd probably not think too hard about it. Other songs make me consider the critics who say that Leprous sound like heavy Imagine Dragons now. I really wanted Like a Sunken Ship to click with me when it was released as a single. The last 3 songs have this oily sheen of Muse or Sleep Token that lingers on your skin, and I like those bands. A lot, actually, to the point of being a Muse fan since Black Hole and Revelations, but they've certainly frustrated me too. Bad songs and mediocre Muse albums. Sleep Token either being emotionally crushing or annoyingly saccharine, with Vessel's weird alt-rock warble never helping much. Maybe I don't want to admit that I like a so-called legitimate band that evokes those styles. It feels like it shouldn't be Leprous, even if Melodies of Atonement feels like a natural part of their catalog. But eventually, enough heavy guitar with that impeccable tone and Solberg's wail put me back in my happy place. Leprous will be playing live at the Sinclair in Cambridge on September 14th. It's a beautiful venue with ceramic tile floors, perfect for more pretentious acts. Am I really sounding like a fan now, or someone disappointed that I got attached to a good but flawed band during a difficult time in the world? I mean it when I say the good parts are stellar. Faceless for Song of the Year. Oceano, Living Chaos. Oceano was always a band that I thought had a dumb name, and them coming from the mid to late 2000s deathcore scene certainly didn't help. I'm not proud of making fun of the genre as much as I did back then. In the end, every scrawny scene kid making MySpace deathcore is still a part of metal history. With Oceano releasing their first full-length in 7 years, I wanted to see how much I could tolerate now. Living Chaos is not a bad record, especially for Oceano fans, but its biggest issue became apparent the moment the record began, too. The album may have been shooting for a chaotic, wall of sound approach, but the end result was so muddy that I could not even discern guitar from drums, from even some of the vocals. I had my best headphones on, too, and I wondered if they were malfunctioning. I even listened to a couple songs off their debut, 2009's Depths, to see if this was an issue Oceano always had, maybe to some extent, but Depths' production didn't detract from the music, even if I wasn't a fan of it. I've become more open-minded about deathcore, trying to understand what its fans enjoy. In a live setting, it's loud and intense, and the simple breakdown beat awakens deep excitement and rage within me. If it's flattened too much on the album, though, then I have nothing to grasp onto. Elements like electronic drum beats, synths, and some great dynamic vocal performances from frontman Adam Warren always made me wonder what was going to happen next. That is, when I could make it out in the mix. And despite the production, I thought that Darkness Rising was an excellent song. It makes me think this album might be a lot better performed live in a venue with good acoustics. Winter Sun, Time 2. If you don't know anything about Winter Sun, then consider yourself lucky. I wish I could look at the Finnish symphonic metal band with fresh eyes and think only about their scant few albums of music. The allegations of the band's mastermind, Jari Mäenpää, allegedly grifting and defrauding fans to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, is enough for its own episode. For the sake of us all, I promised myself I would stick as closely to the music as I could for now. The worst part about listening to Time 2, the second half of the Time project that Mäenpää first promised in 2006, is thoroughly enjoying it. Combining epic symphonic metal, power metal, melodic death metal, and a bit of folk, as with every Winter Sun release, Time 2 immediately sweeps you off your feet and makes you forget about the humid August afternoon. The icy cave is in front of you and the world glitters with fresh snow. I made the choice to listen to both Time releases back to back. Absent of any context, they're both good albums, but the 12 years in between their releases are apparent. In some ways, Time 2 is superior, but in ways that feel like they've reversed the natural order of the world. The slick, shiny production of Time 1 has been toned down, and a lot of the mellow death influences of Winter Sun's self-titled debut have come back, with those being some of my favorite parts of Mäenpää's sound. And then the cracks show. Transitions into solos feel choppy, especially for an album very heavy on guitar solos. Instrumental interludes got tacked on. I was warned ahead of time about the final track, Silver Leaves, ending with 2 minutes of leaves rustling in the wind, and it was even worse than I anticipated. The track already exceeded 10 minutes without it. Can you really forget the almost 2-decade-long saga of this project after all? You start to anticipate perfection that was never possible, sure, but also the same polish that made Time 1 professional to a fault. It's hard recommending Winter Sun to my listeners. If you like what you hear and you're invested enough, you'll figure out the whole story for yourself without me. For the sake of moral consistency, I still bought Time 2, and their Bandcamp link is in the description. You're not supporting a rapist or a murderer, after all. In some ways, they're the peak of what one might broadly call epic metal, the top tier of music for pre-Christian gods, snow-dusted forests, and lofty ambitions. And like it or not, Winter Sun still scratches that itch. Nails, Every Bridge Burning. If anything, I have to commend California grindcore band Nails for coming back with an album at all. Infamously having most of the band quit in 2020, Every Bridge Burning is their first release in 8 years. A quick listen at 17 minutes long, it may as well be a double CD release by grindcore standards. As a passive listener of Nails' previous work, there's a big and noticeable jump in production quality with Every Bridge Burning, though not enough to defang the onslaught of relentless, bitter anger. It leans more into its death metal influences while dripping with the rage of punk. Every lyric is soaked with seething resentment, every revealing, nasty feeling that spews forth when you cut off an ex or a friend. It's a tough read, but one I've certainly resonated with before. Sadness, I Love You. In a twist for my intro, this recommendation came from the Facebook group Metalhead Poser Posting, instead of from my more official channels. And Sadness have had a productive August, releasing multiple albums and songs, but I need to keep myself sane and focus on one release at a time. A project of musician Damien Ojeda, Sadness is heavy shoegaze. Is it metal? I'd rather listeners figure that out for themselves. But wherever you draw a genre's line, it's a sunset-colored explosion of emotion, of love and tenderness towards an anonymous partner that'd suffocate them. It's crushing like the weight of a lever on top of you. The album isn't for anyone looking for a polished experience. It's layered and lush, and each song builds up to black metal-esque riffing, but also sounds like it was recorded in someone's bedroom with the windows open. The drums are distant and hard to notice, and hard to discern if they're physical or electronic, and I have a feeling that the answer might be both. But I understand any answer to that question. It's an album of pouring one's heart out in a private diary, or a love letter that gets shredded after completion. It's a perfect soundtrack for a summer romance, or what one might wish their summer looked like. Modern Rites, Endless. A melodic black metal band with members in the United States and Switzerland, Modern Rites was a complete wild card to me. I've found that melodic black metal can be a great genre, but one prone to major disappointment too. Perhaps this is me hinting that I didn't like the newest Rotting Christ album at all. Modern Rites is on the other side of the spectrum from that kind of melodic black metal. For Endless, Modern Rites is certainly melodic, but in the sense it's very riff-driven black metal too. There's still plenty of the lo-fi, basement recording, cold and dungeon-like sounds of black metal, an air of occultism and evil that still lingers around. And there are synths in the mix, but it's not an omnipresent element either. The main instrument is still the guitar, bringing riffs up close to your ears that could open up a mosh pit instead of leaning into black metal's distant, even weightless sound. It was a delight to discover and listen to, and how August, a sticky and awkward month, still makes its mark. I missed a lot of albums so I could keep my sanity. Dare I say it, my album of the year got released in the first half of the month, but I'll leave that one as a surprise for the end of 2024. That, and this episode did not need another essay tacked on. September is where concert season picks up in earnest. I will have lots to talk about my crazy weekend standing at the barricade 3 nights in a row that will make your feet hurt by proxy. And yes, there are still good releases to look forward to. No matter where you are in the world, it's time to celebrate. And so good night. I'm Theo Morgan, and I'll see you at the merch table.